there's that near miss phenomena where there's this rush and then the crushing disappointment, and that emotional roller coaster produces reactions in people that we crave at an almost subconscious level. Somewhere between 0.5% and 5% of the population has problems with that. I tend to think it's the best numbers I think are in that 1 to 2% range. So given 100 people, one of them probably has a gambling problem. If you think about your networks of people, you probably do know someone, whether you know that you know or not. You probably do know someone with a gambling problem. Whereas if you think, most of us, we think about our networks of people, we know several people that have substance use issues somewhere along the way.
So that kind of a question that just jumps into my head is, right, like, so what do you think about gambling was hush hush, no gambling, only in Vegas. Now you see advertisements for it left and right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess, what do you think about that? Is this a new wave is coming, or like, what do you?
So I don't. So I see. Sometimes you see people that are very pro gambling saying there's not going to be any problems. It's just a new economic activity. And then sometimes you'll see people that are in the anti-gambling community say this is going to completely restructure society as we know it. And I think both are completely wrong. I think of it in terms of if you think about people being predisposed to developing a problem with addiction, and then I mentioned really early on in this kind of podcast that, well, sometimes you might be predisposed but are never exposed to it, right? So you might be predisposed to develop an alcohol problem, but for whatever reason, you just chose to never drink in your life. And you never drank, so you never knew that you were predisposed because you were never exposed to it. I think gambling is going to be like that. I think more people that would have never developed a problem will, but I don't think we're talking about some massive epidemic. I think we're talking, if the prevalence rate is 1% now, maybe the prevalence rate goes to 2% now. That's an absolute doubling in the number of people that have gambling addictions, which is a very big deal. But it's also not like some rampant disease wrecking all of society. And so it's this kind of nuanced view. But I do think more people will develop problems that don't have it. And I think it won't be as bad as some people are afraid that it is. I am concerned, especially with the fact that a lot of states are legalizing the ability to gamble from your phone. The privacy aspect of it scares me a little bit. It's easier to be responsible with your bets when you know people are watching you. But if nobody's watching you and it's not real money and there's not chips on a table, it's just numbers on a screen, I'm concerned, but it's a cautious concern, not a... I don't necessarily believe that it's definitely going to be a huge problem. I want to see what happens. And that's what a lot of our research now is just documenting trends over time.
I guess, what are they addicted to?
So there's variability depending on the game of preference. In some studies actually indicate it's an addiction to the ambiguity and the chance aspect of it. So what we actually have seen in repeated neurological studies and cue reactivity studies, that are just different paradigms that we use. People seem to be more attached not to the win, but to that moment right before they know whether it's a win or a near miss. So imagine on a traditional, so slots are really complicated. Imagine on a more traditional slot setup, you've got your 3, 4, 7, whatever it is, rows, spinning, right? And they hit in order. And whether it's a digital slot or the old school traditional ones, they don't all stop at the same time. They stop one by one. So there's this build of like, all right, I got this one logo showed up, this one fruit in the old school slot machines. And the second one just hit the same. And there's this building anticipation, like, ooh, what's going to be next? And then the third one hits just the same. And you're just waiting on that fourth one. And in that brief moment, there's this heightening of, everything inside. Like adrenaline kind of starts to pump. There's a lot of other kind of neurochemicals getting involved, bringing your attention into this moment, really tying you into what's about to hit next. What's going to be that last one? And what we find is that the arousal level actually hits the hardest when you get, 3, 4, whatever it is in a row, and the last one misses than when the last one hits. There's that near miss phenomena where there's this rush and then the crushing disappointment, and that emotional roller coaster produces reactions in people that we crave at an almost subconscious level.
I would have never thought it that way, right? Like, I would have thought that they were addicted to the sensation of winning, but it sounds like they're really addicted to the sensation of almost winning and then losing.
Right. And if you
like,
talk to most
boom,
gamblers,
boom, boom.
If you talk to most gamblers, they'll be like, but no, it's the winning. And at a conscious level, it is the winning. But when we look at what's happening underneath the surface, it is that bump, bump roller coaster of that almost hitting it and then dropping. And then that makes the win even that much sweeter, right? Because you've gotten that ride the roller coaster up and drop, ride the roller, and then finally it hits, and it's like yes. But again, it is that it's all built on the losses. Like you have to have the losses for the wins to be appealing.
Does it matter the game? Like, is there a difference between the person who's addicted to blackjack versus craps versus poker versus slot machines?
So blackjack versus craps versus poker, actually, most often there's not a whole lot of differences going on there. Uh, I've joked that the difference between someone who has an addiction to poker and someone who's on the World Poker Tour is how good they are, right? It's not that addiction isn't quite the same as what we're seeing with slots in particular, and the reason being skill-based games. Craps is kind of more chance. So blackjack and poker have more skill pieces. Poker being one of the most skill-based games with some chance interjected into it, and then everything gets progressively more chance-based. Those type of people that develop those problems, it's typically a complicated picture based less on the inherently appealing nature of the game and more on what they're using the game to mean for themselves. Slots, I in practice you see more people addicted to slots, to sports betting, to Keno, in more rare cases like extreme lottery ticket buying, things like that. But for those people, there's often this clear use of the gambling as a detachment from something else going on. So we've documented this in a lot of our research that people with PTSD, in particular, are really drawn to slot machines, to games that are very kind of zone out and just bring yourself into the game. So, I mean, you could develop a slot machine problem without PTSD, but oftentimes we see the slots functioning as a way of shutting out the rest of the world, shutting off your internal world, and just being in tune with this one emotional roller coaster and not the rest of your life. It's chaos. Where that's a less common presentation for poker, things like that.
Most interesting gambling case?
I think though some of my most gambling cases are the ones that have won big, and I don't mean like oh they won 5,000 or 10,000. Like I have cases that have won 1 or 2 million either via lottery or via some just insane casino payoff, and then lost it all. Just I mean it says something to say I was up $2 million at one point, and now I'm in the whole 500,000. I mean that speaks to what's going on.